Yes, sir.
So early on, and I think you were citing somebody that I don't know, I think you said that people don't pay attention to the words that they use or what they mean. Would you connect that with everything else about how they talk? Like, I tend to think of myself as somebody who thinks about the words that I use in those movies a whole lot, but there's all kinds of other stuff how I talk that I might pay less attention to.
There are two answers to that question. First of all, Shibata's word was words, and I should have clarified that by that I meant every linguistic level. Your pronunciation, your words, your syntax, your pragmatics, your semantics. You don't pay attention to anything. Okay, so words for me was just Shibata's word, which symbolized all of language. Now, I know that we do pay attention to not only our words, but our pronunciation and so forth when we speak, when we are monitoring, but not when we are not monitoring. When we are monitoring, and this has to do with some of the stuff that I said at the end of the talk, when we're monitoring, we do the most irregular, strange grammatical things that ever come out of our mouths. When we are not monitoring, we speak our vernaculars, the stuff most likely that we learned when we were very young, before English teachers started beating up on us and so forth. And the stuff that comes out of our mouths is incredibly regular, incredibly grammatical and systematic within the grammar that we learn. So by the time we get to school, we are already bidialectals and tridialectals. We've learned what I've called in the literature a post-vernacular. Your vernacular is what you got, right? And it's going to stick with you for a long, long time, maybe for life. Some low-level features you may not even be able to shake. I still can't distinguish between PIN and PEN. Although, interestingly, I can do it in Spanish. But it's because my English grammar isn't turned on or something. I don't know what it is. There's something working up in there, or maybe, I'm not sure. But so I agree with you. It's possible that you can be paying attention to something, but this is not what Shibata meant. Shibata meant just, when you're going around doing your everyday life, not when you want to appear fancy, not when you appear in court, not when you're at your dissertation defense or whatever else it is that makes you pay attention. And even then, you can't be paying much attention, right? Lexical stuff is the folk object par excellence, right? We have a bigger awareness of words. But how can you be paying attention to your syntax? The only way you can be paying attention to your syntax is if you were a minority speaker who had multiple negation or some other horrible thing and just got it beat out of you. But notice, if you got it beat out of you, that means that you pay less and less attention to it, and you've automatized it. So that's what Shibata meant. And he certainly didn't mean words. He meant language. And by this I refer to what Bill Goff calls the observer's paradox. The more that you know that somebody is watching, listening, recording your language, the less likely you will be a good speaker of human language. You're not going to speak your vernacular. You know this because there's an accident, and the TV camera comes up and they start to interview some old boy standing there on the street. And he says, yeah, I saw the alleged perpetrator fleeing in a vehicle. This old boy had never said alleged perpetrator and flee in his whole life. But there's the microphone and there's the camera, so all of a sudden his vernacular has just flew out the window, or flown out the window if you like other morphology. Is that what you're after? Okay, good. Yes, sir.
I found it interesting that people perceive the male synthesized voice to be about a full step further south than female. Did you keep track of whether there's a gender difference in those who are rating the voices, whether the males or the females tended to rate the voices further south or north?
Indeed we did, and there was not only no difference in gender, there was no difference in age, and there was no difference in the region who did the judging. And that was amazing to us because we thought there would be interesting differences there. But it just didn't turn up. It's unusual because usually in such kinds of sociolinguistic experiments you get lots of interesting demographic variation. No variation. Men are from the south, women are from the north, and everybody knows it. Men and women know it equally well. Yes, ma'am.
Would the judgment of who speaks better English or not have to do with the fact that the social events related to the region where the people are from, like such as the whole Civil War could be the dividing between the North and the South, like the North are called the Yanks or whatever, and it's because they're believed to be more proper because of their beliefs during that time, and then that just carries on to what people are taught and how they're raised in their homes.
There's no doubt that the Civil War is a watershed event, which I don't have to tell you about in American history. But it seems to me that the fancy South, the gone with the wind South, the well-educated South, as a symbol in American culture continued for a very, very long time, certainly up through the movie Gone with the Wind. And so for a long time, the Dukes of Hazzard South, or the Hillbilly South, or the Beverly Hillbilly South, was not the dominating idea of Southern. So although the North won the Civil War, as you recall, there was no antipathy to the South as a particularly boondocksy, poorly educated place. In fact, the plantation South was looked upon as a pretty fancy place, right? Now, Rhett Butler from there for other things, right? So I think over the years, age has had a great deal to do with this. Now, I think in my parents' generation, maybe to a certain extent, even in mine. In fact, I think I'm the swing generation in this. I think it was during my generation that the NASCAR Hillbilly Dukes of Hazzard South began to dominate the larger American picture of what the South was. Certainly when I was very young, I had a strong idea of the plantation South. Popular culture, other kinds of things contributed to it. And then the older I get, the more I realize that most Northerners now conceive of the South as a Dukes of Hazzard South. So I think it wasn't the Civil War that just said, oh, these guys lost the war, so they're uneducated. People in a sense knew better than that, yeah?
Like the social and cultural relation to the area.
Oh yeah, of course, yeah. And obviously, the very large Scotch-Irish population lived in backwater parts of the Appalachian South who really were poorly educated. They were the ones that came to the fore in the national imagination, and popular culture helped here. I don't think popular culture helps with items, with linguistic items, but I think popular culture certainly helps with how our B primes get formed. And I think there's been a real change. And another change I talked about the other day that some of you remember is that everybody over 50 knows that Florida is where people go to retire, and everybody under 50 knows that Florida is where there are Spanish speakers. And then when people draw maps, people over 50 draw a circle around Florida and say retirees, snowbirds, all this kind of stuff. And people under 50 draw a circle around Florida and say Cubans, Hispanics, and so forth. So they're obviously changing perceptions in those B primes. That's why I was surprised, with this gentleman's question, why were there no age differences in this? But remember, we were looking at a very subtle thing, this degree of monophonization. So I think that in one level, where you get these kind of broad things like where's good English, where's pleasant English, you'll get a lot of demographic variation. But where you get these subtle things that people don't even know they're capable of doing, because most of you said you couldn't hear the difference in those things, except maybe the big diphthong and then the big monophthong. But people could hear it, and so that was more of a subjective test. And those are less likely, I think, to show big demographic variation.